All right, opening tip time here on the podcast. Doing some instant reaction to the brackets. We are recording on Selection Sunday. Joining me today, the host of the Seeing Red podcast. I'm going to be hearing from on this podcast quite a bit in March. Troy Mauriello is here. Troy, how are you?
I'm doing good, Mike. How are you doing tonight?
Pretty good. It's a long way since last year. I was talking to you, trying to figure out what was going on at the end, and you were leaving the Big East tournament at halftime because of COVID. Now we actually have a bracket. We have matchups coming on Thursday, Friday. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot better. It's hectic, but you'd rather have hectic than sitting at home doing nothing at this time last year. So we appreciate that for sure.
Yeah, I'd say it's been a fun season. You and I have been following throughout, and we got our brackets in front of us. We have the 68 teams in the field. So what is some when you first saw this bracket, what are your general thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, not even related to the actual bracket. It's going to be an absolutely wide open year, I think. Obviously you have, your teams like Gonzaga and Baylor, Michigan, Illinois, the one seeds that, you would expect to come out, and win their region, sure. But it is March Madness, and I think that we're going to see maybe a little bit of extra madness this year, if you will. With the playing this all in a bubble in Indianapolis, no travel, just no home court advantage, I guess you could say as well. With teams no crowds or limited crowds, I guess. So it's interesting to see how these teams react to this, and then you obviously throw everything with COVID in there as well. What teams are going to drop out, if any. You have these teams on standby, which we've never seen before. And Louisville was one of them. I think St. Louis was another one. Yeah, a couple standby teams. We've never seen that before. Is Virginia going to play? Is Kansas going to play? So it's like we mentioned before. It's going to be an absolute mess, but it's going to be fun, and hopefully we play every game that's scheduled, and hopefully we crown a winner a couple of weeks from now.
Yes, and also shout out to the Duke fans who thought for some reason they were going to be on the field entirely. Like, this team had no chance, and they saw they were like they had to withdraw from the ACC tournament because they had the positive COVID test. You're like, okay, that's it for them, and they kind of knew that. Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, here we go. Like, our season's over. We're not going to waste our time at the NIT. We're going to say our streak ended because of COVID, not because we didn't get picked. And then yesterday they had this whole thing like, well, if we get picked, we'll be able to go. And then they're not even in the replacement team pool, so they do cater. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was a little odd when they said, if we're picked, we'll go. Well, obviously they were never going to get picked. So yeah, that was a little strange from them on their part. Maybe a little overzealous, thinking that they could sneak in with a couple of teams dropping out, and but I don't know, especially with the couple of bid stealers that we saw that I'm sure we'll get to in a second. I don't think that there was really ever any chance for Duke after they dropped out of the ACC.
No, I think the bid steal is definitely knocked Duke out of at least the group of replacement teams. I feel they might on the fringe of that just because they're Duke and they had a decent enough resume to fit in that group. But I think let's talk about the selection committee here, because obviously every year we had bones to pick with them. And great, let's take a look at the bracket in general. Like, how do you think they did?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of complaints. One thing that I noticed right away, Loyola Chicago as an 8 seed, I feel like that's a little bit low for them. I think that they were a top 25 team a lot of this year, so putting them as an 8 seed feels just a little bit low there. And they get a really interesting first round matchup, really, with Georgia Tech as well. I think a team like Texas Tech as a 6 seed maybe was a little underseeded. I haven't really seen that a whole lot. But in terms of the last couple of teams in, obviously Wichita State, Drake, Michigan State being in the first 4, which I don't think anyone saw coming, UCLA sneaking into the field as well. And then obviously the big one is Syracuse not even playing in the first 4, which I think, we kind of all assumed was going to happen if they were even going to make it. Talking about bubble teams, there's a reason why they're on the bubble. It's because they all have flaws, and they all, don't have the strongest resumes in the world, or else they would be in the tournament as an at-large team. So, in terms of the bubble teams, I can never really complain all that much. I was a fan of one of them this year, and I could tell you that, they have a lot of flaws, these teams. So one or the other, I think that they did a fine job. Louisville obviously is out. You put a team like Michigan State maybe a little lower than you thought, Syracuse a little bit higher, little things like that. But nothing that really stands out to me as they got it totally wrong.
Yeah, I'll speak as a Michigan State fan. I will say, you know what, like, they deserve to be down near the bottom of that list. They had a really rough year, but the wins at the end helped them out. The Loyola Chicago point's interesting, though, because that was something I noticed. I write some stuff for Fansite as well. So I took a deep dive into their team sheet. I mean, right now they are top 10 both in the net and on the Ken Palm rankings. The number 9 Ken Palm, I think number 10 on the net. And you figure this is like according to the metrics, one of the 10 best teams in college basketball. Instead, they're an 8 seed. They're playing Illinois. They're possibly in the second round. They get out of that first round game. And that's a rough road.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting. I mean, that Midwest region, I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more. That Midwest region is absolutely stacked. When you look at Loyola Chicago as the 8 seed, Georgia Tech, who just won the ACC, as the 9 seed. I mean, you've got Tennessee, you've got Oregon State, who just won the Pac-12, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, Rutgers, even Houston as the 2 seed. I mean, that is a stacked Midwest region. Going to be really tough to get out. And I'm looking forward. Hopefully we get, Illinois and Loyola in the second round, and then maybe an Illinois and Ohio and Oklahoma State matchup, maybe even in the Sweet 16. I would absolutely be interested in watching that one for sure.
Yeah, Ao DeSumo versus Cade Cunningham. We must see TV.
Yeah, absolutely. That's those are the matchups that you dream about in March Madness. So that would definitely be one of them for sure.
Yeah, let's go back to the bubble for May. We have to talk about Syracuse because I remember on Saturday night I was texting you, people on the podcast here at this first time, that we're watching the Big East final and Georgetown beats Creighton. They just blow them out of the building. We're sitting here, how funny would this be if Georgetown's the one would steal Syracuse's bid? Because I figure at that point everybody has first 4, maybe on the brink. I think at one point some brackets that was the last team in. Now they're not in the first 4. They are clearly in the field. They get a clean number 11 seed against San Diego State. They're playing in that 6-11 game, playing into potentially, I forget who the 3 seed is in that. I think it's West Virginia, correct?
Yeah, it's West Virginia. Yep.
Yeah, I'm sitting there. I see that pop up on the screen. I'm just sitting there going, what the hell's going on out here? Like what did they see in Syracuse that made them say we had to put this team in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't fully get it. Syracuse is one of those teams that it feels like they're always kind of getting the benefit of the doubt from the committee a little bit. I think they were 1-7 in quad 1 games this year. Certainly didn't have the resume of a team that should be, cleanly in the tournament. And then, like you mentioned, in the last 24 hours, we had 2 teams enter the field that would not have been in the field normally. These bid stealers, as we call them, in Georgetown and Oregon State. Presumably, we thought could have been knocking out Syracuse from the field, or at the very least, you would think knocking them into the first 4 if they were cleanly in the field. But I guess that the committee must have seen something on Syracuse resume that, vaulted them over a Michigan State or a UCLA, or even a team like Wichita State that was the 1 seed in the American conference this season. They won the regular season in the American. I know that the American isn't, one of the top conferences in the country, but it's still a very decent conference there. Knocked out in the semifinals, and now they're playing in the first 4 while Syracuse jumps them and has a bye, I guess you'll say, into the first round of the tournament. So definitely a head scratcher there for sure.
That's what I was just perplexed as I started looking at team sheets. I mean, I look at Syracuse's team sheet. Their best wins are they beat North Carolina at home.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They beat Clemson at home. Mm-hmm. They had a win over Virginia Tech when Virginia Tech was coming out of COVID pause. And they got swept by Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh is not very good in the ACC. So that's one you stare at. You mentioned Wichita State. They beat Houston. Houston was a 2 seed on the bracket. Drake is another one that was in the playing games, and Drake at least split with Loyola Chicago, who are going to one of the 10 best teams in the country. I don't know how those 2 teams got jumped by Syracuse.
Yeah. Wichita State is the one that really makes me scratch my head because, as I mentioned, I mean, the American is not this fantastic conference, obviously, but still a strong conference, and to win the regular season in that conference, and then lose to Cincinnati, I believe, which is a bad loss. Don't get me wrong, on Saturday. To be dropped into the first 4, then that's kind of a bad situation for them. But yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, Syracuse, we were sitting here on Thursday after they lost on that buzzer beater thinking, does that knock them out? Was their resume strong enough? And then given what transpired over the next 48 hours, I guess you would say, I didn't think that it was. I was surprised to see them in, and then I was even more surprised to see them in the field of 64, really not even having to play in that first 4.
And knowing their history and knowing how hard it is for teams to get ready for that 2-3 zone on short notice, would you be all surprised if somebody ended up the Sweet 16 after all of this?
Yeah, I've seen Syracuse, make some runs before, but I don't think it'll be this year. And like you said, the road that they have is just too tough, going up against a 6 seed in San Diego State and then having to play West Virginia, potentially in the second round. I don't think that's in the cards for this year, at least.
Yeah, I think one thing I also noticed in the committee this year that I like was that they gave more love to the mid-majors than they usually do, because usually those teams like your Drakes, like your Wichita States, like Utah State even got cleanly in the field. A lot of people had them as either first 4 out or in that first four at least. And I'm happy to see them give some love to the mid majors, especially the ones who can achieve and get a lot of wins and not, sort of be this scuffling, high major team that has a bunch of losses and say, oh, well, they played a lot of good teams and you can excuse the losses to get them in. I think it was good to see the mids get rewarded a little bit.
Yeah, we had a lot of mid-major teams on the bubble this year, including a bunch in the Mountain West, actually. And you're right. And I mean, to your point, we have Michigan State and UCLA, two kind of blue bloods, historic college basketball programs playing in the first four. Like you mentioned, you had Louisville, another classic college basketball program, not even in the field of 68. So I mean, it is interesting. I saw a lot of that, saying that a lot of bracketologists saying that they might kind of go towards more mid majors this year than any other year before, and maybe only playing in, conference play maybe had something to do with that. But it is kind of refreshing to see some of these smaller schools getting some shine as opposed to, the same 10, 15, schools over and over again, for sure.
Yeah, it is. And since we're talking about the snubs here, who do you think are the biggest snubs in the field this year? I feel like Louisville's got to be up there. Anybody else you feel like upset did not get in?
Yeah, I guess Louisville would be the only one, and even Louisville, you had a chance in the ACC tournament, and you didn't take it, or not even a chance, but taking care of a not very good Duke team would have pretty much locked you into the tournament, I think. And they didn't do it. If you give the committee a chance or a reason to keep you out of the field, they're probably going to do it. And in Louisville's case, they did that in the last week, and it stinks. But yeah, I don't. Like I mentioned before, these bubble teams that are, have these, not great records, I guess you could say. They all have flaws. They all have issues with them. They're all not, these top flight teams, or else they would be, cleanly in the field. So I don't get too worked up over, oh, this team got in or this team didn't get in. Louisville, I guess, is the one, but even Louisville, kind of played themselves out.
I felt bad for that. I felt bad for St. Louis too. I felt like there was a point where I felt the committee sort of was punching these teams about the COVID pauses because they didn't have as many opportunities to pick up these quality wins, especially like the Billikens, because that team I've watched a couple of times. They are good enough to win games in the tournament, but this is one of those things where they only play 20 games. They had some bad loss in there coming off of COVID pauses. Like that was one thing I felt bad for. I'm like, hey, like if this team had a chance to play more games, they could have done well. And like, I know the committee was late in the week said, no, you can't schedule extra games. They was taught they were going to try and pick up a game to boost their resume. I felt bad for them.
Yeah. And, even, to your point there, limited non-conference as well. They didn't have a great chance to really, pick up maybe some non-conference wins or play some non-conference games. And for a team like that, obviously, in the A10, but in not one of these power conferences, you need every chance that you can get to not have an opportunity to even play after they lost in their conference tournament this week to pick up another game. Stinks for them. It's just a byproduct of the year, though. You're going to have a couple of teams that, went on these pauses and struggled to get out of them. That's why, it was really just as important to kind of stay healthy as it was, to play well on the court. So stinks, obviously, but, unfortunately, not a whole lot you can do about these pauses that these teams had to go through.
Yeah, they couldn't. And I will say also a little plug for Iona here, local representation here. They and Rutgers are basically the two from this area, along with UConn, that made the field. And Iona, Rick Pitino, a hell of a job there. This is a team that basically played 5 games in 3 months because of a very long COVID pause. And then they go down to Atlantic City. They could see in 9th because the MAC has the stupidest tiebreaker I've ever seen. And you know what? 4 wins in 5 days. They're facing Alabama. And that could be an easy game for them, but they're there.
Yeah, I'll give them credit as one of the teams that went to a pause, obviously, and didn't get killed by it. Played well out of the pause. That's obviously speaks to the coaching job that that staff did this year for sure. Going through multiple pauses actually, and never really missing a beat, I guess you could say. It was so team to team based on how they were going to deal with these stoppages, and some teams handled it better than others.
Yeah, indeed. And let's get to the first round. Obviously, we got our first 64 matchups set here. Well, obviously waiting to play in winners in the first 4 games, but which games jump out to you and say, I'm making sure I'm gonna have time to watch these games?
Yeah. One right off the bat that's really interesting to me, UConn against Maryland in the East region, the 7-10 matchup. I think UConn is a potential team that could make a run here. They could be matched up obviously with a team like Alabama in the second round, who I think that they can get by. That's an interesting game to me. UConn, obviously Maryland, two kind of, you don't want to say blue blood programs, but two, really strong historical programs that have a history of making runs deep into this tournament. And now they play in the first round there. I'm going to stick in the Big East too, actually. Villanova, Winthrop, and Creighton and UC Santa Barbara. I have to admit, I don't know much about Winthrop and UC Santa Barbara. But it's interesting to see two Big East teams in a 5-12 game. Obviously, Creighton is a team that's dealing with a whole lot of off the court things. Villanova lost their best player, so two Big East teams in a 5-12 matchup, which is kind of interesting to me to see that. And then I'm going to go Clemson and Rutgers as well. The 7-10 in the Midwest region. Rutgers is a team that I don't think has played to their potential really all season long. I thought that they were going to be a perennial top 25, contending team, maybe a team that could be seated, somewhere in like that 4 or 5 range going into the year at least. They never really, lived up to that. They never really even gotten any big wins, really. They kind of more just took care of business in the games that they should have won. They don't have a really bad draw. I think Rutgers has a decent draw here against the Clemson team that's not great. And then Houston, who I think you would say is probably the weakest of the 4 number 2 seeds. So there's a chance there for Rutgers to make some noise in their first NCAA tournament in a while. But it starts with that game against Clemson. So those are just a couple of games that definitely caught my eye. And also I have to say too, in the East region, Michigan State and UCLA, the winner of that game gets BYU. I've seen BYU play a couple of games. They obviously gave Gonzaga a game about a week ago in the WCC final. So, whoever wins that game going on to face BYU, I think it's kind of an interesting dynamic there. Two blue blood programs facing off for the right to face mighty BYU in the first round. That's kind of an interesting one to me. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic as well.
Yeah, I'll add a few more in the mix here. I think, and I love those 8-9 games. Obviously the one you mentioned before, Loyola Chicago, Georgia Tech's fascinating because Georgia Tech is one of the hottest teams in the country right now. Loyola Chicago, obviously a top 10 team according to the metrics. The LSU St. Bonaventure game will also be a lot of fun because the Tigers cannot play defense to save their lives. And the Bonnies are one of the best defensive teams in the country. So that's going to be a fascinating contrast of styles. North Carolina, Wisconsin, another 8-9 traditional like blue bloods there. Carolina is really a throwback here this year because they like to play back to the basket and they have so many bigs they can throw at you. It's going to be a lot of fun there. I will also say, if you're looking for offense, Arkansas, Colgate in that region there, first to 110 is going to win that game.
Yeah, and I mean, you spoke on the net earlier. Colgate is, I think, number 9 in the net right now. They're a top 10 team in the net. Obviously, I think that one might be a little bit flawed. Something going on with that for sure, with the way that the Patriot League did their schedule this year. But if you believe that, I mean, Colgate and Arkansas is the game to watch. A lot of people are putting Arkansas on ups alert. I don't know about that, but that's going to be a fun game for sure.
Yeah, another one that's going to be fun in terms of the outside potential is Virginia and Ohio out in the West region because Ohio has a guy named Jason Preston who I've seen him play. He played against Iona last year. I was in the truck working that game. That guy is a star. That guy has a chance to be a future NBA player. This team shoots 36% from 3 as a team, so they have a good chance to hit their outside shots, beat the Virginia pack line defense. I would not be shocked if Ohio beats Virginia in the first round. Yeah,
and with Virginia, you got to keep in mind, obviously, right now they're in their quarantine. Tony Bennett said earlier tonight, right after the bracket was released, that a bunch of his players are in quarantine right now. They hope to get out on Thursday, so they're not practicing until Thursday at the earliest right now. They're going to go to Indianapolis on Friday if they register all negative tests from here until then. Fly to Indianapolis on Friday and then play an NCAA tournament game on Saturday. So not an ideal situation. I think a lot of people are going to be picking that upset, Ohio over Virginia for sure.
Also, another team in a similar spot that had a rough draw is poor Kansas because Kansas, we know they're not big inside. And who might they get in the if they obviously the first round game we think they're going to win. They get through that, they get Evan Mobley and USC. Not great for if you're weak on the interior. Get through that, you get Luka Garza. Not a lot of fun if you're a Jayhawk fan.
No, that was not the region that you would want to be seated in if you're Kansas. You're absolutely right. You assume they get through their first round game, but obviously a tough matchup with a 6 seed in USC, another team. I'm very high on the Pac-12. I think the Pac-12 is better than people gave it credit for. So another USC team that's kind of strong as a 6 seed there. And then, like you mentioned, Luka Garza and Iowa, if you're able to get through them in the Sweet 16, not a great draw for Kansas for sure.
No, I also think the 5-12 is a lot of fun ones. And Georgetown, Colorado is fascinating because Colorado is probably the best team in that league, though they lost in the conference tournament final to Oregon State. And Georgetown, we saw the Big East week, red hot from three. Patrick Ewing's got this team really fired up. There could be a live dog out there.
Yeah, and Georgetown is another fascinating one. Obviously, this incredible run, four wins in 4 days in the Big East tournament. But now you take off. What I'm not sure if they're playing Friday or Saturday in the NCAA, but still, you take off 6-7 days. Then after that incredible run, you wonder like how much of that momentum is going to carry over. Are we going to get the same Georgetown team that just won 4 straight games in the Big East tournament? Or are we going to get the Georgetown team that we saw, basically the rest of the season? It's a very interesting dynamic with Georgetown, at least, with this week off after this incredible 4 days of basketball.
Yeah, I will also say there's a lot of Big East flavor in the 5-12s this year because you said the 2-5s. Villanova's going down. I'm calling that one right now because that Winthrop team is 23-1 out of the Big South. They score 80 points a game. Villanova did not look the same without Colin Gillespie because we saw what happened after they lost him. They lost to Butler. Butler shot the lights out against them. They lost to Georgetown in the Big East tournament. Those are not very good teams on the whole this year. I know Georgetown got hot in the Big East tournament, but Winthrop lost 1 game all season, and they are going down there. I think they're going to knock them out.
The one thing I will say about Villanova, and someone else brought this up tonight, they've had 2 losses since Colin Gillespie went down. One was on a tip-in at the buzzer, basically, against Providence, and then one was that close loss against Georgetown in the Big East tournament. So they do have the 2 losses, obviously, and they're 2 bad losses for sure, but they were close games at least. But you're right. I mean, that's a spot there where, that 5-12, a lot of people like to pick the 5-12 upset. Villanova, without their best player and their leader, certainly seems ripe for an upset there in the first round.
Yeah, I'd say those 2. And obviously, there's a lot of these teams, too. It's a lot of guys a lot of teams are coming in with these key injuries. You mentioned the COVID things at Kansas, Virginia, Villanova, no Colin Gillespie. Michigan without Isaiah Livers, a completely different basketball team. Their 1-2, their draw is pretty tough. Like, I would fade the Wolverines pretty hard if Livers is not healthy this tournament.
Yeah, and they got a tough second round matchup potentially against either LSU or St. Bonaventure, like you mentioned, 2 pretty strong teams. So tough draw for Michigan as well right out of the gate, and especially like you mentioned without one of their best players. Going to be interesting to see how they respond to that as well.
And Florida State looming the Sweet 16, and that's a very deep basketball team Leonard Hamilton has down there.
Yeah, absolutely. Florida State's got a bunch of guys that they can throw at you too, so you're not ready for them. Like you mentioned, I mean, just getting through obviously LSU and St. Bonaventure, then potentially having to face off with someone like Florida State, Colorado, like you mentioned, one of the best teams in the Pac-12 this season. It's going to be a bumpy road for Michigan if they're going to make it out of that East region.
Yeah, I feel like I barely mentioned Gonzaga because it's such a given they're going to be in the Final Four. But if you look at their draw, it's also interesting that they played the 2, the 3, and the 4 in their region. Obviously, beat all of them pretty convincingly, and getting through the non-conference schedule. So you're Gonzaga, you're Mark. You're looking your broad, like, man, I feel pretty good about this.
Yeah, I actually didn't even realize that. You're absolutely right, though. Iowa, Kansas, and Virginia knocked off all 3 of them. Gonzaga, and pretty easily all 3. Yeah. I mean, Gonzaga is the team to beat. There's really no other way to say it. Obviously, undefeated this season. I honestly, if I was a Gonzaga fan, I would have been okay with them losing in that conference tournament final last week when they were down pretty big to BYU. I wouldn't have hated that, to just go into the tournament with 1 loss, to not have that pressure of trying to complete the undefeated season. But yeah, I mean, no team really matches up with them. Like you mentioned, they've really run through the teams in their region already. So can they do it again? We'll see. But right now Gonzaga is clearly the team to beat.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those years in the pools. If you're in the bracket pools, you and I are both in a bracket pool. This is one of those things you have to sit there as you're filling your bracket out and think, do I go with Gonzaga and hope I get everything right? Or do I take the shot somebody beats them and then hope that I'm one of the only ones who has it and wins the pool that way? That's the risk you have to run this year.
Yeah, exactly. You got to figure that out, because I think a lot of people are going to end up with Gonzaga, but it's the road that gets there. Do you go with Gonzaga, but then a lot of upsets everywhere else, or do you go kind of chalk and knock off Gonzaga kind of early? It's something that I'm going to have to consider when I'm filling out my bracket.
Yeah, obviously it's way too early. The brackets came out like 3 hours ago, from us, so we're not going to give you Final Four predictions here. They will come a little later in the podcast. I'm going to have some more guests on, but Troy and I are going to be coming to you on the podcast quite frequently throughout March. We're going to be checking in basically every week until the end of the tournament. So we'll be back next week, talk about the first weekend, set you up for the Sweet 16. Then we'll talk about the Final Four, get you ready for that. And after that, break down the national championship game, sort of set up next year. So it'll be a fun run through March here.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. It's the best couple of weeks of the year. We've already gotten through the conference tournaments. Now we go into the NCAA tournament, the big one. Missed it for a year, but we're happy to have it back, and I'm happy to be on here with you breaking it all down.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun because last year, I mean, on that first, because literally as COVID happened, it shut down in the middle of championship week. We were 3 days away from Selection Sunday. We lost it, and then on that first Thursday afterwards, when we would have had that game tipping at 12 noon, I just felt it. I'm like, man, I missed this. And I know this year's be different because we obviously a couple of days delayed because you have to account for the COVID testing, getting everybody in there. But we're in for fun tournament.
Yeah, it's good to have it back after that year off. It feels like 5 years since we had an NCAA tournament, so definitely good to have it back for sure.
Yeah, Troy, I want to thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, I'm going to follow social media, keep up with the Seeing Red podcast.
Sure. Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter at Troy Mauriello. Mauriello is the last name. If you're a St. John's basketball fan, first of all, I'm sorry. We had a tough last week going, but if you are a St. John's basketball fan, or if you're just a Big East fan in general, definitely check out my podcast, the Seeing Red podcast. We cover St. John's basketball and a little spice of Big East basketball as well.
Yeah. From what I've been hearing too, it's not sound like they want to go to the NIT, and I cannot blame them because after this year, you didn't make the tournament. You didn't want to go sit in a bubble in Texas for 10 days. I really would not.
Yeah, no, I totally understand the decision to not play in the NIT. Like you mentioned, I mean they've essentially been in a bubble for the past 3 months now. I can't blame them for sitting out the NIT, which is really just a meaningless tournament for experience. In a normal year it would have been fun, but this year I can totally understand.
Yeah, because a lot of things with the tournament, it's like, oh, besides the games, you get to do fun stuff in the city you're in. You get to have some fun. At least in the regular, the NIT, you're going to the campuses, you're getting some true road experience. This does nothing for you, really. So if you're a high major school, I'd be shocked to see many of them in this thing.
Yeah, and you don't even get the fun of maybe playing in the Garden for the last for the semifinals and the finals. So at the end of the day, not worth it for sure to be in a bubble somewhere in Texas, I think, for a couple of weeks.